Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how to create a simple holding or coming soon page. This is our first tutorial, so please, if you like it, do give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more tutorials in the future, and as it is our first one, we'd love to get your feedback on it, good or bad. Drop it in the comments and we'll use it obviously for any future tutorials we make. Just to note as well, the files that we create in this tutorial are available for download on GitHub, and again with that there will be a link in the description. So this is the project that we're going to work on. It's as I said, a very simple holding page, coming soon page, the sort of page that you'd like to put up when you've started a project but haven't really created anything yet. You've got a domain name, you've got a URL, but you just need to put something up there to say, look, this is what's coming. And this particular one also gives people the option to get in contact with the business either by calling them, emailing them, or getting directions to the business if that's applicable for the business that you're doing. This particular holding page is fully responsive, so it'll look good on mobiles, tablets, and most browsers. And it's also got a few animations and a few little things that just make it look a bit nicer. As you can see, when you reload it, the logo flies in from or rather rolls in from the right, the buttons fly up from the bottom, and the background image will change as well each time you reload the page. There's also some transitions applied to the hover state on the buttons, but we'll get into that in a bit more detail. So it looks nice. The idea is though to keep it as simple as possible. This is very much a beginner's guide to how to create something, and we'll be going over what HTML and CSS and a tiny bit of PHP means. If you're already familiar with those concepts, you're already familiar with the languages, and you just want to have a look at the code, skip forward. We'll put timestamps in the video description as well. So feel free to do that so we don't bore you with stuff that you already know. The idea with this page, like I said, is to look good, but it's so you can deploy it quickly. So we're going to be using variables just to make it so that you can reuse this file on lots of different websites. You can very quickly go in, change a few variables, upload a new logo, and send it to a new project. Be that for a deli like this demo one, or I don't know, an architect's, but an outdoor hiking company, whatever. The idea is we're going to create one single PHP file that you can very quickly make a few quick changes, and it'll be ready for whatever the next project is. So that's the plan. The images that this particular page will come with, as I said, they change each time. They're all going to be royalty free, so you haven't got to worry about that. You haven't got to worry about attributing them to anyone, and you haven't got to worry about downloading them or keeping them on your servers yourself or anything like that. But we'll get into that in a bit more detail in a short while. As I said, to make this holding page suitable for reuse over and over again, we're going to be using CSS variables. Now they're very handy, but they do come with a caveat in that they don't work in Internet Explorer at all. We're sort of trading off convenience for not being able to use them in Internet Explorer. People do still use Internet Explorer. As of I think this month, I think it takes up, what are we on? About 2.5% I think of total market share. Yeah, 2.47% of total market share, but that is almost exclusively, in fact I would say exclusively, on desktop computers. You don't use Edge on anything else. It's not on tablets, it's not on mobile devices. So 5.16% of desktop computers still use Internet Explorer, and the reason for that is historic. Typically they'll be used by large companies, corporations that have software that was designed for Internet Explorer and it won't run on any other browser. Typically when you have something like that, they will always have a secondary browser that they use for actual websites and browsing the web, be it Chrome or Safari or whatever. Whilst Internet Explorer is being used by 5%, 1 in 20 of the browsing people on desktop, it's never their only browser. They'll always have something else because no websites really work particularly well with Internet Explorer these days. That said, there are lots of ways to adapt this holding page so it does work on Internet Explorer. If you'd like to know what those workarounds are, the best way to implement it so it looks good on those older browsers, then as I said before, drop a comment, let me know, and maybe I'll do a follow-up tutorial on the numerous different ways there is to get around the absolute pain in the backside that is Internet Explorer. FYI, it does work. This website will work on Internet Explorer, it just won't look particularly well. This is what it looks like on IE. It's there, it works, the information's there, but as you can see, it's not particularly nice. It doesn't look anywhere near as nice as the actual proper website does on a proper modern browser. So yeah, it doesn't work particularly well with Internet Explorer. Okay, so like I said, if you want to learn more about how to make things suitable for Internet Explorer, just drop us a comment. We'll look at doing that in a future video. Okay, so how do we create the website? Well, we're going to use this piece of software here, which is Visual Studio Code from those lovely people at Microsoft. It's a great piece of software. It's a great text editor. It's basically all it is, but it has lots of third-party extensions that work with it, which you can sort of think of as apps, I suppose. So you get the basic program, and then you can install lots of different third-party extensions that just make the writing of the code and checking of the code and updating of the code and things like that much easier. There's obviously a lot of information on VS Code out there, but if you haven't used it before and you want to, just Google VS Code and you go to the website and just download it. They've got versions for OS, Windows and Linux, as you would expect. It's absolutely brilliant, love using it. So first thing to do will be to create a folder, and we're going to put in that folder, we're going to put 3 files. The main file, which is going to be where we're going to be holding all the code, that's empty at the moment. We'll just call that index.php. The reason most holding pages would typically be index.html, index being the first file that the browser will look for when it first loads up the page, and HTML obviously being the standard type of a standard language that will be used for a web page. HTML and PHP are fairly interchangeable. They do very different things. PHP basically is code that is run on the server before the website is sent to the person who's looking at it. So if you want to manipulate the website in any way before you send it to the browser, before somebody actually looks at it, that's what you would use PHP for. We only use it for one little instance in this, and I'll explain that in more detail why as we go down. But if you didn't want to use it for that, you could just call it index.html and be done with it. The other files that we've got are logo, because you're going to need a logo for the page. This is just a simple logo in PNG format with a transparent background. And the other file we're using is favicon.ico, which is a little icon, and all it is essentially is it's a much smaller version of the actual logo itself. That's all it is. And you can create favicons or fave icons, however you prefer to pronounce it. There's a few websites that will do that for you, which is, to be honest, is one of the easiest ways of doing it, and they're very good. My particular favourite one is realfavicongenerator.net. You basically go on there, upload your icon, and it will automatically generate all these little icons that will show up in iOS or on your device, and also in the little tabs on your browser. So it's good to have them. You just click generate your favicons in HTML code and it'll download them all. You don't need a favicon, it's just good practice. It looks a lot better, and particularly when somebody saves your website to the home screen, for instance, on their device, it's much better to have an actual proper icon. And you can add backgrounds to them and do all sorts of things if you want. So that's a great website. That's realfavicongenerator.net, these guys. turning this blank page into the holding page that we're trying to get hold of. We're going to be writing this in predominantly HTML for the content and CSS for the styling. As I said before, there's a tiny bit of PHP, but we'll go into that in a bit more detail when we come to it. If you already know about HTML and CSS, like I said, skip ahead. But just to give you an overview, if you're very new to website design, many years ago they decided to split websites between content and styling. So HTML is essentially what you use to write the content on the site, the physical information that's on there, what appears. And CSS is a language that they use to create the styling, so where it should be on the page, what colour it should be, how big it is, things like that. To give you an idea, for instance, here's the BBC News page for today. That's what it looks like. You've got your pictures, you've got your titles, all those sorts of things. Now if I just view that page, if I suddenly delete all of the CSS off that page and just view pure HTML, this is what the website actually looks like. As you can see, there's no layout. We've got icons that are all sorts of ridiculous sizes, pictures that are in the wrong place. That is what a website looks like without any styling, without the CSS. And when you apply the CSS and the layouts, then obviously it looks much more readable. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be writing the content in HTML, and then we're going to be writing the styling in CSS. Like I said, there's a tiny bit of PHP in here, which is why we've called the file index.php rather than index.html. But you can put PHP inside HTML. PHP can be used to output HTML. There's a lot of crossover. But like I said, you don't really need to know much about that for this particular tutorial, just a small bit that I'll get to in a bit. So let's just crack on. And we'll start writing the HTML, the actual content of the page. The first thing you want to do is there's a couple of headers and things that need to go in there to tell the browser what the file is that you've actually served. Now, because we're using an add-on in VS Code called Emmet, all we need to do that is simply put an exclamation mark and a tab. That will pull in very basic generic information that needs to be in a HTML document, so your browser knows what it is and how to render it and what to do with it. The only thing we'll need to change in here is the title for the page, which will say "Welcome to Mason's Deli." That's going to be the title of our holding page. A little point here, it's not really good practice to use punctuation characters in text that's going to be output to the actual browser. Apostrophes, to be honest, are pretty safe in this instance. But for instance, if you wanted to output a smaller than or greater than symbol, it just messes up the code, because then the browser will interpret that as you trying to write code as opposed to just trying to write text, which is all you actually want. A safe way of getting around this is just not to use punctuation at all, and instead use something called HTML entities. These are basically short codes that you can use instead of these characters, and here's an example list. So for instance, for a single quotation mark, which we want to use there, you can either use that code or you can use that code. It does exactly the same thing. So we would always recommend don't put punctuation in text that's going to be output to a website. Always put one of the entity codes in. There's others as well for things like copyright, which we're going to be using later, and registered trademark. They're quite handy. You can also use them for special characters as well, accented characters, things like that, if you need to. So that's the title. Now there's a few more things that we need to put in this area. As you can see, this is the head area, so this isn't actually content for the website. This is just things that you're telling the browser. So you've told it which character set you want to use, you've told it what the title is, things like that. But there are a few more things that we need to put in the top there. And what we're going to do, because this is designed to be a simple page and we're trying to keep the code in as short as possible, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage some external libraries. So basically what that means is we're going to use some external websites and some external code bases that we can just import into our site and use their features without actually having to write any of the code. That's the general plan. And the first thing we're going to use is Google Fonts. We're going to pick a font that we like, a font that matches the logo. I think this logo was done in this particular font, Montserrat. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that into the website. So first of all, you need to put in the head that you are going to use that font and tell the browser where to get that font from, because we're not actually going to physically put the font files in our holding page, because that would be too much work and too much bloat, and we just don't need it. It's a lot easier to get to simply link to Google and tell it that you're going to be using that particular font. So the way you use Google Fonts, dead simple. Select the font that you want. I quite like that one. We're going to use that one on this. And then it'll tell you, it'll actually give you the link to put in the header of your HTML or PHP document. Literally a case of putting and pasting. So now that's telling the web browser to, whenever you request font family Montserrat, that's where it goes to go and find it. So now you've got a whole font system loaded there, and you didn't have to do anything. There's no extra weight or bulk on your servers. They'll just go and fetch that from Google. Another one we're going to use is this, which is a great CSS tool called animate.css. What it basically is it's just a file. You can click on download and you can see it's this file that was written by Daniel Eden. Very handy, and all this code that he's already written for us, we're going to be able to use that in our website without writing any of it down. All we need to do is grab a link to the content delivery network where it is, and put another link in here, and that's that done. So now all that file that we saw before is now available for us to access in our holding page. And what it gives you the ability to do is it gives you the ability to animate any item on the page. There's a whole load of different animations here that you can use. Find one that you like, and then you can just apply it to, like I said, anything on the page, buttons, text, anything really. When it comes to animations, less is more. We don't want to go back to the bad old days of just everything flashing and moving about on a page for absolutely no reason. But a small amount of animation, like for instance we've got here with the logo rolling in and the buttons jumping up from the bottom, a small amount of animation is good. It just makes the site feel a bit more interactive. So we will leverage all this work that Daniel Eden did, creating these animations. We could write them ourselves, but why bother? Why bother? So that's that, and we'll get into more details of how we actually use them a little bit later on. The last one we're going to use is another external library called Font Awesome. If you go to fontawesome.com and click on Start Using for Free, it will give you this link to put in your header. Simply copy it, paste it in, and now you've got access to all of Font Awesome's icons. We use those in this particular one to give us the little icons for the phone and the envelope and the little directions route map there. Again, it's just a good way of adding extra functionality and extra features into your website, your holding page, without actually having to add any extra bloat to it or write any extra code. These are shortcuts. They're great to use. They're very simple, very lightweight. And like I said, with just those 3 lines of code, we've now got a font, we've got a load of animations we can pull in as and when, and we've also got a load of icons we can use. So that's the idea of using those. Now that those 3 are in, that is the end of the information that we need in the header. There is loads of more stuff we could put in there, but for the purposes of a simple holding page, we just don't need to. You could put things like, telling Facebook what image to use when people paste a link to your website in there, all sorts of stuff like that. But for the purposes of this, we'll just keep it simple and crack on. So our header information's in. Obviously, nothing's on the page yet because we haven't written any content. So that's the bit we're going to go to next. We'll move out of the head and into the actual body of the web page itself. So we're going to start by, if you're not familiar with HTML at all, or the syntaxes, or how you write it, or why you write it, then definitely do a quick course on that. This is going to assume at least a basic knowledge of some of the tags, the very standard, straightforward tags that you use in every page and how they're laid out and how to use them. If you want a more in-depth video on that, then by all means let us know and we'll do one. But for now, we're going to assume a basic understanding of things like the div. Now we're going to write a div, and we're going to give it a class of, if I spell it right, bg image. Now that was a bit of a labour typing that. Another good thing about Emmet is you can have lots of shortcuts. So if you want to create a div for the class, just type div, put a dot in for the class and type the name of the div, press tab and it will do it all for you. So we've started off with just 2 divs. There's not going to be anything in those. It's just one that will have the background image for the page and one that will have a cover or a filter that goes over the image just to dim it. Again, we'll get into that in more detail when we get to the styling, but at the minute we're just doing content. Next, we're going to create a div with the class container, and everything else that we put in the page is now going to be inside that container. We use a container, you'll see later on when we're styling it, we put everything in the container so we can centralize that container, put margins on it and just make sure that it's in the right place in the page rather than, you know, different elements being all over the place. So we're now going to create another class called logo, and inside there we're going to have an image, and that image is going to be the logo file that we have in our directory. So we're going to have inside the container, the first thing we're going to have is the logo. We're then going to have a heading. We'll use the H1 heading, and we'll just say new website coming soon. And underneath that we're going to have a paragraph. Now in that paragraph we're going to have, as you see on the finished web page, this is the heading that we've just done. That's the logo, that's the heading. In the paragraph we're going to have an address and a telephone number, just basic information so people can find us and get in touch with find the company rather than get in touch with the company. But we're going to have them so they're also clickable links. So if somebody clicks that address, it'll give them directions. If somebody clicks the phone number, it'll automatically ring them. People expect that, you know, particularly if you're on a mobile device. If you see an address, you should just be able to stab it with your finger and you'll get directions. Similarly, if you see a phone number, you should just be able to stab it with your finger and your phone should ring that person. That's pretty basic stuff, and every website should have that. So at the moment, if we just do a refresh, we've got the logo, we've got the heading. All looks rubbish at the minute, but remember this is just content, this hasn't been styled yet. And in the paragraph we're going to create a link tag, so that's an A. We're going to have it go to, well, we'll come back to where we're going to have it go to for now. We're going to the content, we'll just put the address in. Everton Street, Manchester. If anybody wonders where this is, it's the Old Granada Studio, so don't go there, it's closed. And what we're going to put in there is the href, which is the location that you're going to go to when somebody clicks it. We're going to get that from Google. So a really easy way to do that is get the address of the company that you're doing the website for, pop it into Google, and then just simply click on share, and it'll give you a link. Copy that link, drop the link in there, and then when anybody clicks on to Allerton Street, Greater Manchester, it's going to open up Google. It's going to take them to this page, and then they can get directions, or they can save it, or they can, you know, see where it is. They can do whatever they want with it. So that's a nice little quick way of getting that information in there. After that link, we're going to put a little squirrely divider, and we're going to have another link. And this is going to be for the phone number. So telephone 0161494960150. That again, not a real phone number, so don't bother ringing that. I'll put that in the wrong place. Let me just move that inside the tag there. And the href for that is going to be, you're not sending it to a website, so you're not going to go HTTPS, you're just going to put tell, which means the browser should take this as an instruction to phone that number, and then it'll use obviously whatever phone is on the device. So let's give that a save. So now we have 2 Atherton Street, Greater Manchester. If they click that, they'll get the directions, and the phone number, if they click that, it'll open whatever phone app they've got and make the phone call. So that's those bits. The next bits to do are the buttons. We're going to give them a class of their own. We're going to put a div class buttons, and we're going to put the 3 buttons that we've got in there. They're all going to be inside their own H tags. The first one's obviously going to be the telephone number, so we're going to put the instruction for that again is the telephone 0161 496 0150. And inside there, we're going to put another div with the class button. Not buttons as before, just single button. And we're going to put text in there of callers. So you have a look, what that's done is it's created a class of buttons surrounding what are going to be all 3 buttons, and inside there is a link, and inside that link there is another div with a class of button, and it just says callers. Now we do the same thing again. This next one's going to be the email, so for that we use mail to, and then the email address we'll just put info@example.com in this instance, and in there we'll put div with a class of buttons, and inside that we'll just put emailers. So now we've got 2 callers and an emailers. The callers will ring the number, the emailers will email the email address there. And the last one we're going to put is the direction. So again, we'll just cut and paste this link that we used before. This is going to do exactly the same thing as clicking on the address would have done. And in here, another class of button, and inside that it will say directions. Now the more eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that I did the links for the map slightly different, as in I auto-inserted this information here. All this is doing really is it's telling the website that when it opens the directions to open them in a new window. Don't open them in the same window, because you don't want the website to close just because somebody's clicked some directions. You want it to open in a new window but keep the website open. Obviously when you're sending emails and phoning, it doesn't matter, because they'll just open in their relevant apps anyway. So that's why that's done, in case anybody was wondering. So now you've got the basic information. The only other thing we need to do is the footer. So outside, we'll close off the class of buttons, we're done with that, and then we'll just create another div with the class footer, and inside there we'll put we need to put copyright symbol. Now again, we'll use our HTML entities for that. The copyright symbol is there, or you could just use ampersand copy semicolon. That'll do exactly the same job, but we'll use these for now. And we would put 2019 Mason's Deli, and again we'll use the HTML entity code for the apostrophe. Have a quick look at that. 2019 Mason's Deli, cool. Now this is where we're gonna. That's all well and good because it is 2019 at the moment. If you have this holding page up, you might want it to automatically update when the year changes. You want the copyright obviously to always be up to date. So this is where we're going to use a little bit of PHP rather than having 2019 actually typed into it. What we're going to do is we're going to have the server check what the actual current year is and put that in instead. So that way you haven't got to worry about if you use this template in 2019 and you use it again in 2010 or 2011, it'll always have the correct date. And that's just a very simple bit of PHP. The way we write PHP inside HTML is we have these tags either side. So anything inside that, the server will action before it sends the finished HTML file to the web browser. So we'll use the PHP command of echo. which basically just means print, really, is the best way of doing it. And we'll tell it that we want to print out the year. So date is a function in PHP. Again, you can look into this in more detail, but this is just a handy little code snippet that you'll use again and again. This will look at the date, it'll get the year of the date, and it'll echo that out to the website itself. So if you save it, you'll see it's exactly the same, nothing's changed. But now, if it was 2020, I'd say 2020. If it was 2021, it'd say there. Just to show that that is actually doing something. If I was to change it to M, for instance, it'd show the month. If I was to change it to D, for instance, it'd show the day. So there you go. It's a Friday. It's in May. But we'll use the year. So I'll just say copyright the current year, and then obviously whatever information you've put in there. And as far as the content of the site goes, that is it. We're absolutely finished. There's nothing else to put in there. But obviously, it doesn't look particularly good. You wouldn't want to put a site out like that. So we're going to start adding a few things into it to make it look nice. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the little icons in front of the calls, emails, and the direction buttons. And as you saw before, we added the Font Awesome library. And the way you implement that is really quite simple. You basically put an I tag in. You give it a class of, I'll just close the I tag off there as well. So you put an I tag in with a class. Now the class you put FAS for Font Awesome. And then you just put the actual icon that you want. In this case, Font Awesome phone is the icon that we need. And if I save that, you'll see it's just popped a little phone in there. There's a whole range of icons. Obviously, go on the Font Awesome site and it'll tell you what they all are. But we'll just copy that down, and for this one I'll put the envelope icon. You see an envelope appears. Oh, it would help if I close it off as well. There you go. And I'll just copy that down again to the root, and for the root we'll use the, for the directions we'll use the root icon. So we've got a few little icons, that makes it look nicer. We'll do a little bit more. At the moment there's no animation on this page, so when it loads it just appears. It doesn't really do anything. But obviously we added in the animate library, so we can animate some things to make it look a bit nicer. And this really couldn't be any simpler. As you can see on the finished one, we animate the logo and we animate the buttons as they jump in. So let's go to the logo class. All you put in there is you simply put animated, and then if I can spell animated, and then the animation that you want. You can get these obviously from animate.css. So for instance, I think it was the roll in for this particular one. So let's just look at entrances. We've got bouncing entrances, you can bounce it in, you can do all sorts of things. Where's the one that I wanted to use? Fade in, rotating in, roll in, there you go. That's a nice one, it just sort of rolls in. It looks good for a circular logo. For a logo that isn't a circle, you might want to use something different. So the way we implement that is simply to put the word animated in, so that the browser knows to look for the animation, and then the name of the animation, which in this case is rolling. Be careful with the case when you're writing these. You can see rolling is, the first word is always lowercase, any words after that are always capitalized, so it's ROLL, capital I, and then N. If we just quickly refresh the page, you'll see that now rolls in. If we'd done the wrong capitalization, it just wouldn't work. It'd just be like, no, I don't quite understand what that means. And that's all you do. So if there was a different one that you wanted, let's say for instance you wanted a zoom in left, just type in zoom in left. Save that. Oh, not that. Save that, and there you go. We'll zoom in from the left. Bit weird. But for this, we're going to be using rolling. Same with the buttons. Now we don't want the buttons to appear individually. We want the three of them to sort of all appear on the page at the same time. So we will apply the class to the. So we'll apply the animation to the class buttons, which includes all three buttons at the same time. And again, we just do that by writing animated, and then the animation that we want, which in this case was bounce in up. capital I, capital P. So now we've got our little icons, we've got a little bit of animation going on there. It's all looking a little bit more inviting, a little bit more immersive. It does make a real difference. Okay, so now that's done, literally all the content is done. When we now need to move on to the CSS, which is obviously all the styling, tell it what size things are, where they should be, how they should act, what colours they should be, all that sort of stuff. Because at the minute, as you can see, it looks absolutely pants. Now, when it comes to writing CSS, best practice is always to put it in a separate file, an external file. You just call it something like style.css, and then you would simply link it in the top. So you would create a style, you would go link style sheet, and it would be called style.css. And then you would put all your CSS code in that separate file, which you then save here. And that's to keep everything looking neat, and that is definitely the best way to do it. But because we're trying to keep this down to a single file, that's the whole point of this. You open one file, make a few changes, and you can reuse it again and again and again. We're going to put the style information in the actual header, which is perfectly fine. For a small single page like this, it doesn't really affect it in any negative way, and it makes it a lot easier for us. So the way you put CSS in into actual HTML document is simply put a style opening tag and a style closing tag. Now everything you write in here will be in CSS. Now before we start writing our CSS, another little feature of VS Code, which is very handy, is it will automatically colour your code and lay your code out and give you hints on your code based on the code that you're using. So at the moment, as you can see on the bottom right here, it's using PHP. So if we start writing CSS now, it's not going to be able to give us hints on what we should be doing with it, because it's going to think we're writing PHP, and it obviously won't make any sense. If you click on that and simply change it to CSS, it will now treat the whole page like it's CSS, which obviously makes the HTML and the PHP look a bit daft, but it'll be good for when we're writing the CSS now. It doesn't change the file in any way, it just changes the way it looks to you on the screen, and the helps and the hints and the tooltips that VS Code will give you. And you can always just change it back again if you wanted to. But for now, we'll crack on with writing the actual styling. Well, as I said before, we're going to be using variables, and we'll just get cracking with those. We'll put some comments in. Anything you write in CSS that has these characters around it will be classed as a comment, as in the web browser will ignore it. You can write anything you want in there. It's just a good way of writing comments so you keep track of what you're doing and where you're doing it. Now, because we're going to be using variables, we need to put a scope in for these variables. That's basically saying where do these variables apply. Do they apply to the whole thing? Do they apply to only certain parts? We're applying them to everything, so we'll use the global of root. So anything that we put in here will be accessible to any other part of the web page. The way you write a variable, a bit weird, but you just put 2 dashes at the beginning and then you give it a name. So we're going to call this main colour, and then you give it a value. Now when it comes to writing colours in CSS, there are a variety of different ways of doing it. Probably the most simplest one is just to write the colour. There's a lot of there's a lot of colours in CSS that it understands, like red and black and orange and purple and light blue and things like that. So for any basic colour, you can just use that. The next easiest way, I suppose, is to use the hexadecimal colours. Just an example here, every colour and every shade of the colour will have a hexadecimal value. So you could, rather than just putting a word in, you could put a hexadecimal value in there. We are going to be using the RGB method of describing colour, which obviously stands for red, green and blue. So what this simply does is it gives you a value of red, a value of green and a value of blue out of 255. So plain red is 255 red, no green, no blue. White is obviously 255 of everything, black is 0 of everything, and anywhere in between just gives you 3 different values. So we're going to be using RGB. it's my preferred method, and it means we can also extend that slightly and use something called RGBA, but I'll show you that in just a short minute. So the syntax for using RGB, you just simply put RGB brackets and then put 3 codes in here, the value for red, the value for green, and the value for blue. Now in this particular one, we're using the colours from our logo. So there's 2 colours on the logo. It's always a good idea, just from a basic design point of view, is to try and tie the colours into the logo where you can. It just makes the site look more professional. If you've got a nice simple logo with this with just 2 colours, just use those 2 colours, don't use anything else. It gives it a really nice finish. And the RGB values for these colours are 216, 211, 186, I think, for that one. We're going to create another variable called secondary colour, and again we're going to give that an RGB value, and that is 128, 119, 50. And you'll see what these colours look like a bit later on. We're going to create some more variables as well. We're going to have one that's called icon width, and that's going to be 240 pixels. I'll go into these in more details when we actually use them, but I'll just pop them in for now. We're going to have a separate icon width for mobile, which we're going to have as 140. We're going to have a footer height, which is going to be the height of the footer at the bottom. That's going to be 30 pixels. We're going to have a background colour, variable of, now this is where we're going to use RGB, but instead of RGB we're going to use RGBA. So we're going to do the RGB bit as normal. What we want is we want a black, but we want a slightly transparent black. So we'll do 0, 0, 0 for the 3 red, green and blue, so that's no red, no green, no blue, so that'll give us a solid black. But then because we're using RGBA rather than RGB, we can then put a 4th value in, which is the level of transparency. So if we put 0.7, what that will do is it will only show 70% of the colour. Whatever's behind it will show through 30%. Again, you'll see that and why we're using it in a short while. Here we go, do that properly. And the last variable we're going to use is something called background image. Now for this we're going to use a URL. So the background image was essentially going to be using a URL, so we're going to be fetching the background image from somewhere on the internet. That's the whole idea behind this. Because as you can see, when you refresh the page, it will automatically pull up a different image relating to the website. So this is a deli, so it's bringing up pictures of food basically. And that's a nice little feature, but we want to be able to utilize that feature without having to create or download a load of images ourselves and put code in that randomizes them and pulls up different ones. We don't want to do any of that nonsense. We just want it to work and we want it to be simple to do. So we're going to leverage a really brilliant website that I'm sure a lot of people already use, and that is Unsplash. If you go to unsplash.com, this is a great repository of royalty-free photos. If you look at the terms of the license, all photos can be published. All photos published on the site can be used for free. You can use them for commercial purposes. You don't need to provide permission. You don't need to credit. You can reuse them. You can do whatever you like with them. The only thing you can't do is sell them on, or obviously use them to create your own Unsplash service. They don't let you do that. So unsplash.com is a great repository for lots of different high quality images that you can use for your website. And there's a couple of other great things about it. They have a really good API as well. So if you go to source.unsplash.com, that will take you to their API, if you like. And from there, what you can do is you can tell the website to automatically pull in different pictures and randomize them each time the website loads. And I'll show you how that works now. Let's go back here and just move to so this is the API side of Unsplash, and essentially what it's telling you here is there's a few different ways where you can pull in images. But if you just put in something like https source.unsplash.com random, if I was to put that in as my URL, it would pull up a random, make sure I put it in quotation marks, sorry, it'll just pull up a random picture. So that'll do it every time. As you reload it, another random picture will come up. So that's great. That's literally all the code you need to do to get a different picture behind your website each time. But obviously we don't just want a random picture. If you get rid of random, because we don't want that, put featured, what that does is it only finds, it filters out any photographs that aren't part of Unsplash's featured range. So the featured range is just basically photos that they've seen, that they've confirmed are good, high quality, and they like to feature them. So I always like to put that in, because then you're not getting rubbish photos or low quality photos, or just something that you're getting the best photos there. And if you put a question mark at the end, you can then filter those photos by tags. So for instance, in this instance, because it is a deli, we only want pictures of food. So every time, if I just copy and paste that into my browser window, it will automatically come up with a random photo relating to food. So every time the website loads, the system's going to pull a random picture from Unsplash relating to food and put it in your background. You don't have full control over it. Obviously, it can be any food. It might not necessarily be appropriate to a deli, but you don't have to do any coding, you don't have to do any mucking about, and it just adds a little bit of an extra feature. You can change obviously food to anything. I mean, if you're doing one for an architect or something, you might want to change that to architecture. You could change it to music. If you're doing something, you can change it to basically anything. So if it was architecture, these are the sort of pictures that it would randomly pull up for you. Again, they're all going to be fairly decent because they're from the featured range, and you don't have to worry about getting them or storing them or copyright on them or anything like that. So that's literally all you need to do. And it'll put in, whenever that background image value is used, it'll pull in, let me just change that back to food because I'm doing a food one. It'll pull in a background. So if we save that, you can see on the website absolutely nothing's changed. Because we've created variables, we haven't applied those variables to anything. So obviously there's a variable called main color that is one of the colors on the logo, but it's not applied to anything, so nothing's changed. Now that we've declared the variables, we can move on. Keep going with our CSS. We're going to do some quick resets. Now the purpose of CSS resets, if you don't know what they're for, sometimes the person's browser, Chrome, Safari, whatever, it will automatically apply formatting to the page. So it might put margins in or things like that. We don't want those, so we'll just do a very simple reset that applies to everything. And the asterisk means everything, and we'll just put some quick resets in there. So we'll change the margin to 0. We'll change the padding to 0. And we'll do some box sizing as well. That can make things very problematic on some browsers, on some devices. So we'll change the box size into border box. If you want to know more about why we do that, by all means, look it up or let us know. We might do another video on a complete video, maybe on resets and what you should be doing and why. This is just a very stripped down few that we need just to make the site look good. And we'll do the same for WebKit. So that's our resets out of the way. That just overwrites, like I said, anything that the individual user's browser might be doing that knocks the layout off. So we'll move in now. We'll do some general styling. Again, at the minute, nothing's changed on the page whatsoever. But now as we move in, we'll start to see things changing. We'll apply some general styles to both the body and the HTML, so that'll cover everything. We'll give it a height of 100%, because the body needs to cover up the whole page. That'll come into effect when we start doing the layout for the container and stuff in a short while. The font family, we need to tell it what font to use, and if we go back to our Google Fonts, it gave us the CSS code that we need to do that. So you can just drop that in there. What it's basically saying is the font family for everything in the body, it's to use Montserrat. And if Montserrat isn't there, that's what the comma is for. If it can't find it for some reason, you've got a fallback font of sans serif. So every browser will know what sans serif is and will know how to render it if Montserrat isn't there for some reason. But it should be, because obviously we've linked it up top. If I just save that, you'll see now the font will change. So it's pulled the Montserrat font in from Google and it's using it in the website. And then we'll apply a little bit of a colour. This is going to be the first variable we use. So when you call in a variable, you just put var and put some open brackets, and then the name of the variable, which in this case we'll put main colour. Now I'll save that and you'll see that everything, well, I say everything, has turned into the main colour, which is this one here. Not everything has, because of course the links haven't. The links will be the main colour, but then they'll be overridden by coding that the browser's using that tells it that links should be blue and underlined, and then when you click them they should be purple. Very annoying, and typically you'll always just get rid of that. And the way we do that is you just apply some styling to A's, which are, all the links are A's, and you'll put text declaration none. That'll get rid of the underlining, as you see. And colour, again, is going to be var and main colour. So there you go. Now you can see how the styling is starting to actually take effect on the page. So the next one we'll move down to is the background. Just put another comment in there, so that's background. It's always good to comment as you go in, so you can keep a track of what you're doing and where you're up to. So for the background, remember we created two classes, as you can see down here, BG image and BG cover. We'll just apply some values, some styling to those. So BG image, we want to give that a background image of the variable that we set up before, which was background image, which if you remember, let's put 2 dashes in, which if you remember is this. So basically whenever it sees the class of BG image, it'll apply a background image of that variable, so that. We'll do another one for BG cover, right. And for this we'll give it a background colour of the other variable that we created, which was background colour. And if we save that, you'll see absolutely nothing happens, and I'll tell you for why in just a moment. We could very easily just not use these variables, because these are the only two instances. This is the only single instances of each of those variables that we use. So we could simply just put RGBA down there instead, and the same with that. But the idea with this is to keep the variables up top, so you've only got to go into one location. You haven't got to scroll through all the styling to find it. You can just change it here. So that's why we're doing that. It's all about speed. Create it once and then make it as simple as possible to change later on. So now we're going to add some more styling. We're going to add styling to both the background image and background cover variables. So if you put a comment, between those two, anything in these brackets will now apply to both of those. And the first thing we're going to give them is position fixed. And a height of 100% and a width of 100%. Now, although the background image and the background colour were there, they were right at the top. They didn't have any height or width set to them, so you couldn't see them. Now we've given them a height and a width. So as you can see, both the background image, which is a picture of the burger, and the cover, which is the reason why it's so dark, they're now both there. The problem is, of course, the background image, because it's of a fixed size, it's trying to tessellate it. It's trying to put more than one image in because it's trying to cover the whole area. A few more lines of code will fix that up. You basically put the background position as center, and the background size as cover. You save that, and then what you can see is it will make the image cover the entire area and it'll centralize it. So no matter what ratio the image is, it'll always fill the screen and it'll always centralize it. So you might have some extra bits on the left and the right that you're not seeing, or on the top and the bottom that you're not seeing, but the center of the image will be in the center of your screen and it will fill the screen. So that's the background looking nice. One thing you will notice is our text has disappeared because the background's gone above it. Simple fix for that is change the Z index to -1. So the Z index is basically equivalent to layers, I suppose. If you're doing design work, it'll just put it at the back of everything else that's in front of it. So that's the background done. We will now move on to the actual content. So that's this logo, the headings and all the rest of it. We need to get those looking a bit better than they do. Scroll down there a bit. So we're going to do content now. As you know, we put all the content inside a div called container, as you can see down there. And we did that so we can apply some formatting to the actual container itself. First thing we're going to do is we're going to make it 100% of the height. 100% of the height of the page. That won't do anything at the moment. We're also going to give it the some padding of 0 and 10%. So what that padding is basically saying, padding is spacing, as you'll know if you've used CSS before. And what it's saying, the first figure is the spacing at the top. We're not putting top and bottom. Sorry, we're not putting any spacing at the top and bottom. But on the left and right, which is the next figure, we're putting 10%. That's just to bring the content in from the size of the page. So as you can see there, it's moved in slightly. There's going to be 10% down that side, 10% down that side. And we're using a percentage figure rather than an actual fixed figure because obviously we want it to, we want the margins or the padding, if you like, to be less as the site gets smaller or bigger. So we'll carry on now. We'll put a bit more information in there. We're going to be using a display method called flex. Now flex is great. Flex is basically a shortcut to get everything, a shortcut to centralizing things and making them look a lot neater. If I save that, you'll see what it automatically does is each div it puts into a column. And we don't actually want that. We don't want them in columns. We want them in rows. So we'll put the direction of the flex. Direction. Again, if you want more information on flex and why it's great and why it was a wonderful addition to CSS when it came out a few years back, it just makes everything a lot easier. If you want more information on that, Google it or let us know in the comments and maybe we'll do a video on how best to use flex. But it is very handy. We'll just quickly whiz through it at the moment, and we'll put sex line center. That'll put everything in the middle. We'll also put justify content. We'll put that in the middle. That, no surprises, puts everything in the middle. Sorry, not middle, center. There we go. And that's basically the formatting for the container. Now, one thing you will notice when this refreshes, when it first loads up, you get nasty scroll bars on the side, as you can see there. And that's because when the page first loads, this animation is off the screen, so the actual page is much bigger. And the website obviously is trying to, or the browser is trying to display the entirety of the page, which is why you get those nasty scroll bars. They disappear obviously once the content comes into the window. They go, but they just look really naff to begin with. So, dead easy way to fix that. Just put overflow hidden. So what that's basically saying is anything that's outside of the container, don't show it. So although it's doing exactly the same thing as it was before, it's not showing it until it actually comes inside the container, so you don't get any ugly scroll bars. Okay, so moving on. What we're going to do is, at the moment, because we want this to look good on mobile, we're going to be making it responsive. But at the moment, it doesn't look particularly, or it's not going to look particularly good on smaller screens. Let me just show you why that is. As the screen size gets smaller, you end up starting to cut parts of the page off. So in order to just make that a little bit more user friendly, we're going to give both the container and the images behind it, we're going to give them a min width and a min height. So a BG image, BG cover, and the container. We're just going to give them all a min height of, I think 450 should be about right for this, and a min width of 310. Now that's not really going to make any difference to anybody who views it on any device made in the last, I don't know, 5 years or something, but on some very small phones, for instance, this will force scroll bars on it, so you don't lose any part of the website because of the fact that it's on a small screen. So that's just a little catch-all, but it won't really affect anybody. The next thing that we want to apply some CSS to is the image. Image is a tag, not a class. That's why there's no dot at the beginning of it, just in case anybody wondered. When you're referring to classes like, buttons and things like that, anything class BG cover, class BG image, you put a dot at the beginning. Image is itself a tag, as A's were before, so you don't put any dot in front of them, just in case anybody was wondering why that is. And we're going to give the icon a width of the variable that we set up before, which was I think it was just icon width. That doesn't change anything because my icon happened to be 240 pixels anyway, so that worked out quite well. And we're going to give it some padding on the bottom because it's a little bit too close to the next line of text, so we'll just put padding of 40 pixels. So that just gives you a little bit of a gap there. And one of the benefits of obviously using variables now is if you have an icon that just, let's say it was a different aspect, it was a lot wider than it was tall, or the ratio was a bit off and it just didn't look good at that size, you can very quickly up here just change it and the icon size will change. Just like that. So that's the beauty of using variables. If the next site that you use it on had an icon that looked rubbish at 240 pixels, then you just change it to something that looks a bit more in keeping. Right, where are we up to? Images. We're going to apply some styling to the heading. Again, H1 is a tag rather than a class, so you don't need to put any dot in the front of it. We're going to make this a bit bigger. We're going to put the font size of 2.4 rem. Rem being the standard size of text as rendered by the browser, which I think is typically 16 pixels, I think. So we're going to make it so the heading is bigger. As you can see there, it just looks a lot nicer. And we're going to make it so that the heading is in uppercase as well, because that looks a lot better. There's a few things you can do with text transform. You can capitalize it, lowercase. We're going to use uppercase. So that means that however you type it, the heading is going to be in uppercase, and it looks quite nice. We're just going to apply a bit more, a couple of more little things. We're going to apply some styling to the paragraph. Again, that's a tag, not a class, so you don't need any dot in front of it. And all we're going to do is we're just going to put some margins around it. We'll do top, bottom, left and right. We'll do 0.5 rem, I think, on the top. Nothing on the left, 1 rem on the bottom, and nothing on the right. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, there you go. Just a little bit of margin around the paragraph, just to drop everything else out of the way, make it a bit more easy on the eye. Okay, so that's sort of the top bit done and looking good. The buttons obviously don't, they look absolutely awful at the moment. In fact, they're not even buttons. So let's apply some styling to the buttons. As opposed to button. Well done you if you spotted that when I typed it. Congratulations, you win the star prize. But I've just changed that back to button. Just wanted to point that out obviously before we carry on. So carrying on with the styling of the buttons, we're going to give them a border because at the moment they don't have one. Every button's going to have a border. We'll say 2 pixels, we'll say it's a solid line, and we'll give it a colour of main colour. And if we just save that, you see they've now got borders, which is lovely. We'll give them a little bit of a margin as well because they're right tucked up to each other of say 0.5 rem again. I'll do a little bit of space in between them. We'll give them some padding because they're looking a bit, the text is squashed right up to the top and bottom of the button. So we'll give them a padding of 12 pixels should do it. That looks a lot better. Obviously they're all too wide. We'll give them a width of 160 pixels, let's see. Yeah, that looks fine. Of course, they're all in a row. We don't want them in a row. For the main website, we want them to be, sorry, they're all in 3 separate rows. We want them all to be in the same row. So the way we do that is we just simply change the display of them to inline block. And there you go. So you'll have a single row and you'll have 3 separate buttons, all the same width. Look quite nice and neat. Next thing to do is we will add some hover states to them. At the moment, when you hover them, nothing happens. They'll still work when you click them, but visually nothing changes, so a bit confusing for people. So what we'll do is we'll go onto button and we'll add a pseudo state of hover. So basically any CSS that we put in this particular space will only apply when the buttons are hovered over. So we'll change the background colour, and we'll change that to the main colour, and we'll change the actual font colour itself because obviously you won't be able to see it because it'll be the same colour as the background colour. We'll change that to the secondary colour, I think. Let's just have a look what happens there. So now when you hover over them, the actual text and the icon will change the secondary colour, and the background will change to the colour that the text was and the border still is. So that looks nice. One thing we do need to do, these icons are pushed right up against the lettering, and that looks a bit crap. So on the class I, which is for the icons, we'll just put a bit of a margin on the right hand side there. 1 character width should be fine. Of course, I is a tag, not a class, so you don't need the dot at the beginning. There you go, looks a lot better. So that's looking good. Something that might be helpful though is at the moment when you hover over them, they just change colour immediately. It doesn't look particularly great, and there's a nice little trick that we can use using CSS transitions to just slow that down. If we go back to the CSS for the actual button itself, not the hover effect, but the actual button, and look at transition, and we'll give it a transition delay of 0.3 seconds, and we'll ease in and ease out. So what that's basically saying is it's saying any transition that applies to this button, do it slowly. So the hover is a transition, and so what it's saying is when you apply the hover, do it over the course of 0.3 seconds and gradually ease it in and ease it back out again. And you can see the difference that makes when I save this. Why is that not working? Oh, because I can give it a time. 0.3 what? 0.3 seconds, there you go. And now when you do it, it's just a lot nicer. Eases in and eases out. Looks a lot easier on the eye, a lot prettier. Okay, so let's move on, because this tutorial is going on a bit. Let's move on to the footer. At the moment, the footer is just where it is underneath those. We want it to be at the bottom, and we want it to be fixed on the bottom as well. So the way we do that is we give it a position of absolute. We'll give it if we just save that, and you'll see what it's doing is it's not putting that footer now in the normal flow of the items of the tags. It's now just sticking it right in the middle. So it's ignoring whatever else is on the page, and it's just saying, look, I don't care what's there, I'm going to go here, which is great. But let's give it a bit more guidance as to exactly where we do want it. We want it on the bottom, and we want it from the left to be 0 as well. So it's basically going to pin it to the bottom left. There it is. We want to give it a width of 100%. So that'll essentially make it so it appears in the center. We'll give it a line height of the variable that we created before, which is the footer height. And we will give it a font size of, we'll just make the font slightly smaller, so 0.8 rem. Should do, I think. Yeah, so there you go. That's the footer. So for the purposes of the at least the main desktop version of the website, it's looking good, and it's pretty much done and complete. But obviously we need this to be responsive. And at the moment, if you view it on a phone, it's going to look like that, which is fine, but it can look nicer. That will look quite cumbersome on a phone, particularly as you go into smaller displays. It'll start overlapping and running off the screen and all sorts. So we're going to apply some CSS that specifically only comes into effect when the screen is a particular size. The way we do that is we use media queries. So we'll start a section on media queries. And the way you do them is you put the @ symbol in media and tell it it's only when the screen is, let's say, give it a value of max width. The typical good breakpoint for tablets and smaller devices is 768 pixels. So basically any CSS that we put in here will only come into effect when the screen size is below the size that we put on there. So for instance, let's say we were to change the BG cover to change the background color, say for instance to red, just for argument's sake. Now nothing will happen until the screen goes below a certain width, and then the background color will change to red. So that's really what all that's doing. Obviously we don't want to change it to red when it gets below a certain size, but that's just to show you how it automatically changes when it goes onto a smaller screen. We don't want to do that, so let's just get rid of that. What we do want to do though is we want to basically make everything smaller because the content's too big for a screen, particularly with the resolution on screens these days. If you make things smaller, it's just a lot more appealing and a lot easier to use. So we'll scale a few things down. The first thing we'll scale is the image. That's obviously the logo in this instance. We'll change the width to the other variable that we created, which was called mobile icon width. And again, if we need to change that because the logo is a different proportion, then you can just change it in the variables at the top of the file. Keep it simple. So now again, as an example, when the page goes smaller, the logo will go smaller. Just simple as that. I'll quickly do a few more. We want to make the heading we'll make that font size. We'll just take it down a bit to 1.6, I think we're in, because I think it was 2.4 before. The paragraph, we'll also take that down a bit. We'll make the font size of that 0.8. The buttons, we'll make some changes to the buttons. I think we'll change the padding on them to 0 and 10%. We'll change the max width to, this is obviously not on the individual buttons, this is on the buttons class itself. So this is the div that surrounds the 3 buttons. So if you make that 300 pixels, and we'll give it a margin of 0 and auto, that should centralize it in the page. So again, that won't change the desktop version, but on the smaller version, the logo's gone down and we've put those 3 buttons in the center of the page. And we'll also make the individual buttons a bit smaller as well. So for each of those 3 individual buttons, we'll make the padding a bit smaller, 6 pixels. Border's looking a bit fat, to be honest, for a mobile device, so let's change the border width to 1 pixel, and we'll get the font size down a bit as well. 0.8 ring. That's looking a lot better. So on a smaller device now, everything's going to fit on the screen a lot better. Still the same functionality and everything as before. We'll also make that footer, I think, just a little bit smaller. Well, we'll make the text of it a little bit smaller anyway. 0.6 ring. So yeah, there you go. Looks better. So it's going to be nicely proportioned on mobile now. Still doesn't look particularly. These specific media queries obviously have been based on the screen width. So if they're holding the phone in portrait, it works. If they're holding it in landscape, possibly not so much. So what we'll do is we'll cheat a bit and just copy those down. And we'll copy those down into a new media query. And we'll just say, instead of max width, we'll just put max height. And we'll say, I don't know, 600. Something like that. One thing we don't want to do in that though is the buttons, because we still want them to be in a row. So let's get rid of that and just see what that looks like. So narrow looks good, and yeah, that's fine. It just makes everything a bit smaller when it's in landscape. Okay, super. And that, I think, is probably that. The website's working well. I'll tell you what I didn't do. I kept the background in as a. Oh no, I didn't. I changed it to food. Yeah, there you go. That's it. That's the file completed. As I said, it'll look good on all devices. The idea with this is that you can reuse it and reuse it and reuse it. So let's say you've done it for Mason's Deli, if that was a real place, and now you wanted to do a new one for, I don't know, Jones's Automotive or something like that. All you need to do really is change the title. Let's say, give you a quick example of that, Jones Motors. You could change that to cars perhaps, and then change the colours to whatever the colours were in the actual logo that you wanted to use. Could be anything. Obviously you'd have to change the logo on the favicon, but we'll just save that. And there you've got the colours have changed, and the background has changed to something relating to, in this case, cars. And every time you refresh it, you'll get something different to do with cars. Or I suppose you could put auto or mechanic or something like that and have a play around with it. But that's how easy it is to change it. Obviously, excuse me, you'd also need to change the email address, the telephone number, the information down there. But from a styling point of view, this can be used and reused over and over again. So thanks for watching. I hope that wasn't too long. Hope it was helpful. As I said before, the files, if you just want to grab them and use them and don't really want to listen to any of this or do any of it, they'll be available on GitHub. There'll be a link in the description. Please do, if you like the video, give it a like. This is a new tutorial channel and we do want to make more, but obviously in order to do that we need your likes and we need your subs. So please do like and subscribe. If you have any comments, like I say, good or bad, stick them in the comments below. We will read them all and we'll respond to them as best we can. Any ideas for any future tutorials, anything you'd like to see, any feedback, positive or negative, drop it in the comments. Thanks for your time and we will see you in the next video.